Hey, what's up guys, Sensus here, and today I'm going to be making a rogue vs rogue dueling guide, but before I go into the actual guide, I want to announce the winner of the 50k subs giveaway. Now before I do that, I want to give a huge thanks to everyone who entered. There were over 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments on the video. Now if I had the means, I would definitely get each and every one of you a KeyCool 84 mechanical keyboard, but obviously I just don't have the means to do that, so there's only one to give away today, and if you didn't win, don't worry about it guys. I'm going to be doing more giveaways in the future with hopefully a lot more awesome prizes. But at this point, there's only one keyboard to give away today, and the winner is Kyle Dowell. Big congratulations to you, Kyle. Be sure to check your inbox and get back to me as soon as you can on YouTube. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the actual point of this video, which is going to be a rogue vs rogue dueling guide. Starting off with the talents. This can actually be entirely subjective depending on your playstyle, but I'm going to be showing you guys two setups that I use that I found work pretty well. The first one involves the use of subterfuge, combat readiness, elusiveness, shadow step, prey on the weak, and mark for death. Now this setup is actually the main cookie cutter rogue setup for subtlety spec, so if you use this setup you'll be getting some practice with the main setup you're going to want to use for PvP overall. As far as poisons go, you'll want to use wound and crippling or deadly and crippling. Now the reason why you'll want to use crippling instead of mind numbing, which is what I use in the video, is because the shiv effect that you get out of crippling will lower your target's movement speed by 70% instead of 50%, which is what it would normally be. So you do get a slight advantage with crippling, even though it's not much, but in the end you do get that slight advantage, so it's definitely good to take advantage of that. Okay, this next talent setup may not seem very conventional, but I'm going to go into why it works in a second here. You're going to want to pick up subterfuge, combat readiness, elusiveness, cloak and dagger, paralytic poison, and mark for death. Now even though cloak and dagger got nerfed pretty hard a while back, it still works really well in a rogue vs rogue duel for gap closing, because pretty much when you're dueling another rogue, especially another subtlety rogue, it's pretty much a stealth for stealth battle, and you're trying to get the other person to trinket before you, because essentially whoever trinkets first is going to lose 9 out of 10 times, which is why that gap closer is essential. And paralytic poison, it's amazing for running with, especially if you're dueling another rogue, and this is because you could keep him from kiting away from you by using the shiv effect that you get out of paralytic poison, and plus if you get the 4-stack proc, you'll have the opportunity to get your opponent in a massive stun lock, which can be devastating to your opponent. Now as for poisons, you'll want to run with paralytic, obviously, and deadly. Now for glyphs, in these duels I ran with the glyph of cheap shot, the glyph of evasion, and the glyph of blind. And the main one you're going to want to keep here, if you're going to switch anything out, is the glyph of blind. So in case you have a bleed up on your opponent, it'll automatically get rid of that bleed, so you'll be able to get him in a full blind and it won't break. The other two major glyphs are up to you. I personally like running with the glyph of cheap shot because even though it's only a 0.5 extra seconds of cheap shot, it can mean the difference between being able to get your opponent in that follow-up kidney or not, so I definitely recommend using that. Same thing with the glyph of evasion. It increases your evasion by an extra 5 seconds, which can be vital. So I definitely recommend picking that one up as well. It can definitely give you the advantage, especially if your opponent pops evasion at the exact same time you do. So as long as he's not running with the evasion glyph 2, his evasion will fall off before yours, which will give you a slight advantage. Alright, now that we got all the talent and glyph stuff out of the way, let's get into the actual duels. Okay, so in this first duel, we opted to go for the shiv opener, which is essentially when both rogues shiv each other at the exact same time at the beginning of a duel. It's just a fair way of doing things instead of trying to find each other while in stealth, because whoever finds the other person first will automatically have a huge advantage. So that's why we decided to go for the shiv opener for most of these duels. Alright, so starting off at the very beginning, we both shiv each other and pop evasion at the exact same time. And one thing to keep in mind to keep pressure up on your opponent, you always want to use your defensives offensively in this kind of situation. And this is because rogue duels are essentially very quick. So at this point, we're both trying to get a bleed up on each other so the other person can't get a re-stealth. That is one thing you definitely don't want to allow your opponent to do in this kind of duel, because whoever gets a re-stealth can just reset, so that's just something important to keep in mind. Now at this point I'm fixing to go hard, so I back off a little bit, pop vanish, and reopen with garrote and the cheap shot. Use eviscerate once to get a refresh on my energy and pop shadow dance. Now I did make a little mistake right here. I should have really reopened with a cheap shot into garrote so he couldn't pop combat readiness, and I should have really popped shadow dance and my trinket before I used eviscerate, so I could have gotten some extra damage off, but that's okay. At this point I have the advantage. I follow up my cheap shot with a kidney shot. Now I was a little bit late on that kidney shot. He could have definitely blinded me to mitigate my burst, but luckily for me he didn't, so I blinded him right out of that kidney shot. When it comes to rogue v rogue duels, other than trying to force your opponent to trinket before you do, having better control than your opponent can definitely have an effect on whether or not they're going to trinket or not. Right here, H-Boom actually does something that I wasn't expecting. Before I can get my re-stealth off and get a sap out, he trinketed the remainder of my blind and just got a re-stealth off. Now if you notice, there was a slight delay between him trinketing and getting the re-stealth off, so I could have definitely shadow stepped to him and gotten the sap, but I guess because he caught me off guard, I overestimated the range of my sap. So it's definitely important to keep that in mind. If you have your opponent in a blind and he still has trinket up, most of the time he probably won't trinket it, but definitely be on the lookout in case he does. I got pretty lucky here too. I was able to find him, so I reopened with pre-med into Slice and Dice, opened with Cheap Shot into Garrote, popped Shadow Blades, and followed up my Cheap Shot with a Kidney Shot, and that was enough to finish him off. This duel was a clear example on how control is extremely important in a rogue versus rogue duel. The next duel we're going to look at was actually a loss, and I'll go into why I lost in a second here. So again, we both opened with Shiv, but this time instead of popping Evasion like he did, I vanished and reopened with Garrote in the Cheap Shot, and again I should have really opened with Cheap Shot into Garrote so he couldn't get that combat readiness off. At this point I'm trying to get a blind off, but he shadow melds into stealth before I could do that. He reopened with Cheap Shot, so I preemptively trinketed expecting him to pop Shadow Dance, but he doesn't, so he simply blinded me off my trinket and just kept me sitting there in sap until his DRs fell off. So in the end, I actually ended up sitting in an 11.5 second stun, which is insane. This is a clear example on how you could get stunned for days if you end up trinketing at the wrong time. And finally, the last duel we're going to look at involves the use of the second spec that we looked at, which uses Cloak and Dagger and Paralytic Poison. This time we both started out in stealth, so at this point we're trying to find each other. I got pretty lucky and found him. This time I tried playing it a little bit safe, so I opened up with Pre-Med into Slice and Dice and opened up with Cheap Shot into Garrote, and followed that up with an ambush into a 5-point Eviscerate. Now right here I could have actually vanished and waited for my DRs to fall off since I had a bleed up on H-Boom, but instead of doing that I popped Evasion offensively right out of my Cheap Shot. So that's definitely something good to keep in mind. If you have a bleed up on your opponent and he doesn't have one up on you, you can really just play the waiting game and wait for your DRs to fall off. At this point, H-Boom shadow melds into stealth and reopens with Cheap Shot. Now I don't trinket this time since he didn't pop Shadow Dance. He follows up his Cheap Shot with a Kidney Shot and immediately vanishes right after the Kidney Shot. At this point, I know he had a bleed up on him, so I was waiting for him to pop out. When he does, at this point, I know that his stuns are still DR'd. He puts a smoke bomb down on himself to try to keep me from getting to him. So instead of taking the re-stealth or putting my own smoke bomb down to try to keep him from getting to me, I try to bait him to reopen on me, which he does. Since his stuns are pretty much DR'd to nothing, he just reopens with Garrote. I then wait a second and vanish and reopen on him with Garrote into a full Kidney Shot and pop Shadow Dance and Shadow Blades. This forces his trinket. H-Boom then puts me in a full blind. I end up trinketing that, and I actually got really lucky here and I blinded his kidney. So as soon as I'm out of that kidney, I get a re-stealth and I just keep him continuously stabbed. Now my DR tracker actually lied to me here and said that my stuns were off DR, but since they weren't, I ended up opening up with a DR Cheap Shot. Right out of that Cheap Shot, H-Boom vanishes and reopens with Garrote. I then prep Vanish because I know he's going to get knocked out before me. So I'm looking for him at this point, and since I have Cloak and Dagger, I was able to get to him very easily, which is why Cloak and Dagger is an amazing gap closer for Rogue v Rogue duels. Now H-Boom actually hangs on for a little bit since he's running with Cheat Death. I could have probably won a lot sooner if I utilized Phantom Knives when I got disarmed. Anyway, in the end, I was able to pull off a win, even though it got really close. And that's pretty much it. Now before I let the duels play out, I want to emphasize a few key points. Number 1, make sure to always have better control than your opponent. Number 2, if you get your opponent to trinket before you do, you essentially won, just play it smart. And number 3, overall play smart, utilize all your abilities. Rogues have a ton of utility, so make sure you utilize every last one. Don't just utilize Vanish and Shadow Dance. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to let the duels play out. I hope everybody got something out of this. If you did, please make sure to leave a like and comment on this video. They really help me out. And as always, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.
I'm